Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I want to give everyone a warm welcome to the Heaven on Earth podcast. My name is Maxine Devon. This vision, this podcast has been in my heart and in my field for many years, and now felt like the right time to embark on this voyage, this journey. So thank you for being here and taking the voyage with me. And there's so much intention and hope and devotion behind this podcast. I'm excited to share a lot of what I've personally learned in my life and what I've taught in my courses, and also to share some of the most inspiring people and teachers and voices from my with you all. We have a lot to get to, a lot of big dreams in the Heaven on Earth podcast. And in terms of this first episode, I just wanted to share more about my vision for what we'll explore together, where we'll journey, what the journey has in store. I'd also love to spend some time on the name Heaven on Earth, explain the feeling, the sentiment, the vision behind that, and of course, to share more about who I am and what I'm doing here and my background. So, without further ado, I'd love to dive in and share a little bit about the name Heaven on Earth and the focus for this journey we'll take together. Heaven on Earth is an expression that can mean different things to different people. I'll share what it means for me. It's this idea that heaven is a place on earth, and it's something we can choose to experience at any time. It's this idea that the ethereal realms, what we imagine can only live in heaven, maybe the light, the divinity, the angels, angelic energy. Certainly for me, how I see heaven or the ethereal realms are full of flowers and divine scents with a T, can be experienced on earth. We just need to awaken ourselves to it and almost to cultivate. I'm getting now into some of the work or what I'll teach, but really to cultivate and attune to it. Attunement is about attuning to a frequency, and heaven, in a way, is a frequency that we can access on earth. And the foundation to the sentiment or the podcast, even, and actually the foundation to my personal business, which is called The Power Within, is this idea that we are multidimensional beings in a multidimensional world. And it's really accepting that and shifting our lens, because so many of the programs or paradigms we learned growing up don't really honor our multidimensional nature. They're much more linear or one-dimensional. And so when we can expand our purview or our lens or our way of seeing and experiencing the world to the multiple dimensions that are present and at play, heaven is a frequency we can choose to attune to and cultivate in our life. This idea of heaven and earth being split, I'm going to teach and speak more into that, but I want to still linger a little bit on this idea of heaven being a place on earth, or maybe more so an experience on earth. And I know that it has Kabbalistic roots. For example, just last week was the Jewish holiday of Shavuot. It's a lesser known holiday, even though observant Jews observe it as a holy day. It's lesser known. And in Jewish culture, Shavuot represents revelation. It represents the receiving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, an event many, many moons ago. It's a covenant we made with what we call God, Hashem. And during this holiday of revelation, one of my favorite rabbis, who I'm fortunate to gather with in LA, actually chose to focus on heaven and earth, and this idea that Kabbalistically people experience it as a millimeter off the ground. For me, heaven on earth is a expression that's been in my field for a few years. I mentioned that this podcast is a dream for many years, and now is the right time in my current embodiment to embark on this voyage with you all. But heaven on earth was floating in my field as a potential name for it for a while. And I find with a lot of wisdom or information or awarenesses I'm guided to teach, they enter my field in a really magical way. And there was a beautiful synchronicity. For those of you that don't know what synchronicity means, it's a word that was coined by Carl Jung, one of my teachers. He was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud and created a body of work that I've studied, but also that just aligns with or resonates with what I know or have learned to be true over the last 7 years of my spiritual journey. So synchronicity refers to this idea of a coincidence, but also that there is no such thing as a coincidence. And so now actually I get to get into the fun part, which is part of the physics aspect of what I want to explore and go into with you all, or metaphysics we can also call it. But this idea that in the randomness, in the chaos, there is actually a pattern or a rhythm or a mirroring, whatever you'd like to call it. And he dubs that synchronicity, the coincidences that are not really a coincidence. So much gratitude to Rabbi Peretz for bringing in the theme for our Shavuot celebrations last week. And I'll start speaking also into some of the physics aspects or metaphysics of this podcast. The best way I know to describe the work that I do and what I offer in the world through my business, through my teachings, through my embodiment and my expression is that we're working with the quantum field. And I shared about this recently that actually when I was a teenager, I got into this book by a very famous physicist, Richard Feynman, and I kind of became a physics nerd for high school, so much so that one of my mentors, one of my favorite teachers, suggests that I apply to do physics at Columbia for my undergrad degree. And I was much more into economics by the time I arrived in college. That's what I ended up majoring in. But I did have a deep love and kind of a knack for physics. And it's really beautiful that since I've embarked on my spiritual journey, I really returned to that understanding of reality and energy and understanding physics almost as a study of energy. That's really what it is to me. And really integrating that. So I think one of the biggest challenges in modern society is how disintegrated we are, how we've really compartmentalized different parts of self and also the outer world. So even when we think about the arts and the sciences 1,000 years ago, the arts and sciences were way more integrated than we experience them. We've become very polarized as a society in our collective consciousness. By the same token, science or physics and the field of energy, or what we often refer to as spirituality and wisdom, have been very separated when really at a fundamental basis, they're both describing the building blocks of energy and humanity and life on earth. So the same way that we're transcending the split between heaven and earth, in many ways, we're transcending duality in these conversations, in this podcast, in this exploration of what's possible here on earth in our own personal lives and collectively. I'll speak a little bit more into the quantum nature of reality, this kind of multidimensional self in a multidimensional world. The way I like to describe it when I teach is that before Albert Einstein's work, and it's been a little over 100 years since he introduced something called the general theory of relativity and really changed how we understand physics and reality, we had Newtonian physics. And it was a very three-dimensional version of reality or life. F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. Everything is about force and push and physical on only three dimensions. And I believe many of our systems and reality, at least in the West, I should say, are based on Newtonian physics, very much about force. I like to play with the theme of I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up in the New York area outside of New York City. And a very New York attitude is I'll believe it when I see it. Predominance or preeminence of matter. And actually, the truth of physics, as many of you know, is that matter is really energy. It's this idea of the wave and the particle, that matter is a lot more wave than actual mass or particle. And the wave and the particle coexist is a quantum theory of reality. But really what I wanted to say is so many of our systems are still built on 3D Newtonian physics and are very linear and one-dimensional actually. And what my hope and intention and invitation in this podcast is to expand your version and understanding of reality to multiple dimensions, which I believe is consistent with modern physics, and I believe science is actually catching up to ancient wisdom and spiritual experiences of Earth. So that's what I wanted to say about quantum, and that we'll get into it more in certain interviews or conversations, but we are entering in and playing with the quantum field, which is fun and exciting and powerful for personal growth, powerful on so many fronts for evolution and consciousness, and just a little bit more tidbits about heaven on earth. It's this idea of, right, experiencing the ethereal here on the ground, attuning to a different frequency, and also this idea of experiencing spirit through matter. So we don't want to make earth or matter or Newtonian or 3D physics wrong. I'm not here to litigate or even claim what's right and wrong or true or not. I'm here to expand your experience of life on Earth and access ethereal versions of yourself to really merge the soul self with the human self, to really experience the spiritual through everyday life, what some people call the sacred through the mundane, and to really help guide you into your power, or at least, at the very least, to understand or know your power. So, in a quantum view of reality, in this evolved way of experiencing life, when I talk about knowing your power dawns on you as you realize the power of your thoughts, your intentions, what you speak, how you move through the world. For me, one of the only absolute truths is knowing our power, that we come from the divine, that we have a divine spark inside us, within us, that we are created by the Creator in the Creator's image, whether you believe in God or not, whether you believe in the universe or not, whether you're an atheist or agnostic. It's opening up to a more cosmic view of reality. Because reality and life on Earth is pretty cosmic. Sometimes I think we forget that we are people that are on this planet because of the force of gravity, and we live on a rock that's spinning through a solar system around a sun that's spinning through a galaxy called the Milky Way. That's our home address. Our home address is the Milky Way. I often speak to that in the context of recovering the feminine and bringing the feminine back into our personal lives, into our leadership, into our businesses, into our systems. We live in a place called the Milky Way. That's a spiral. The spiral represents the archetypal feminine. And the milk, of course, is very connected to the feminine, right? To the mother's milk. It's our source of sustenance and nourishment when we're born. We wouldn't be alive without it. So all of that is to say life on Earth can be pretty cosmic, and there are a lot of forces at play, and there's a lot of power within us and at our disposal that most people don't realize. And so, another intention of this podcast is to really wake people up to their power, allow them to feel it, to embody it, to understand it in a different way. So, I want to speak now into this idea of transcending duality, or the polarity of heaven and earth being separate places, things, ideas, and the fact that we can actually integrate them or experience them as one. We can experience heaven on earth. And for me, this connects to one of the fundamental things I teach about, which is commonly described as or known as divine union. And divine union, which is also known as the sacred marriage, is a kind of mystical theory or principle about the union of opposites. The way I love to explain or introduce people to divine union is through explaining this idea of alchemy. So, alchemy, as we understand it today, is almost like an ancient science or form of chemistry where we can turn lead, which is a base metal that doesn't carry much value, into gold. That's how we think of alchemy, right? Some sort of magical process or chemistry that turns a base metal with little to no value, right? Lead's actually even toxic, into gold, which is literally on the stock market, carries a lot of value, and I think also power, energy. And if you look at ancient documents in Latin from ancient cultures about alchemy, you actually see it described as something else, which is divine union, which is actually alchemizing and uniting masculine and feminine properties, archetypes, into this sacred marriage, this union of opposites, transcending duality. And it's actually seen as a way to experience oneness or the divine. I explain it as a pathway into our power. When we stop splitting, whether that's splitting the archetypal masculine and feminine from each other, different parts of self, the science from the arts, right? Or I also talk about it as a metaphor for the head and the heart. When we stop splitting off our mind and our head from what the heart wants, we access union, we access a lot of power. And I actually think that we are playing this out constantly in reality here on Earth. You see it in a lot of places. Actually, you see it in the construct of marriage, which we should do a whole episode on that. But this polarity, right? We experience it in the United States of America strongly in our political system, two-party politics, right? This split, this polarity, polarization. This splitting keeps us small, cuts us in half. A lot of how I teach and see the world and my personal growth story, what I've studied and learned academically or in the classroom and outside, is about these ancient principles and ancient wisdom. And a big part of that is what's in one is in all, what's in all is in one. It's very connected to this Hermetic principle. It's a saying we all know or hear: as above, so below, as within, so without. It's also very Jungian. And why am I explaining that? Because I'm speaking to the polarity or polarization in the collective, in the country of the USA, in modern politics, in the world, this increased polarity, black and white, right and wrong, even gender, right? Male versus female, battle of the sexes. The way I actually teach about divine union is shifting out of an old paradigm of battle of the sexes into a new paradigm of divine union. It's shifting out of zero-sum reality where there's not enough to go around, food, money, water, whatever you want to talk about, into actually abundance is shared and unlimited and abundance is infinite. Actually, in numerology, the number 8 is power and abundance. And it's the number 8 that's the infinity sign. Okay, so these are new realities or new paradigms that when we work with the quantum field or in the quantum field, we can access or download these new paradigms and activate them in our life and activate them in our body. I'm moving my mic for anyone on video to show you that to activate our own inner power center. But what's going on outside of us, the collective consciousness, affects us, and what's going on inside of us affects the outside realm, the collective, the external. So these are actually, I'm starting to get into some principles of a quantum view of reality and the energy world. Hopefully you're still following, and I'm going to try and explain divine union in a few more ways. So when I teach about divine union, it's the union of the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Those are principles. They're like the highest expression of the archetypal masculine and feminine. We'll see, but maybe we'll do a whole podcast just on divine union. For now, I'm just whetting your appetite, warming you up, tempering to explain what I'm trying to land in these conversations in this podcast. So divine union as the sacred marriage or union of divine masculine and feminine is a metaphor for also uniting our soul self and our human self. When I say that we're multidimensional people living in a multidimensional world, I mean it. And I mean that we have a soul part and we have a human part. But the whole point of divine union, it's not just that, okay, we're creating a friendlier dynamic or more acceptance and wholeness, integration and wholeness by accepting masculine and feminine properties of self. We're also integrating our soul self, and that's a beautiful and powerful pathway into our dreams. Our dreams come from our soul self, from the ethereal realms. Think about dreaming or the dream state when we go to bed. It's a time where many religious traditions or spiritual traditions talk about the soul journeying at night when we're sleeping. That's when we dream. So whether it's a dream at night or a dream that's in our field or consciousness, that is coming from our soul, and that can become a reality when we start to cultivate this broader awareness of life on earth, the multiple dimensions here, and our role and our power in that and how we can play with that. So just to summarize, it's this way of experiencing or learning about divine union as full power, integrating parts of self, whether it's masculine and feminine, soul and human, or what I also refer to as head and heart. That's the basis of new leadership, is integrating the mind and the heart, because the heart has powerful intelligence, and we want that to help guide us and give us wisdom and intuition as we move through the world. So the last topic I want to cover as part of this introduction to heaven on earth is some acknowledgement of and speaking into the times we're living in. So I'm going to share some thoughts and opinions on that, and then I'll share a little bit more about why I'm even here, who I am, how I arrived here for people who don't know me personally. So the times that we are living in, the best way I know how to describe them is that we are living in the lifetime of all lifetimes. We're living in a time here on earth that many cultures and traditions beyond space and time have prophesized or written about. Many people might be familiar with, for example, the Mayan prophecy around 2012. Other people might be familiar with Native American and Aboriginal prophecies around this time, this description, the myth of the eagle and the condor coming together, integrating North and South. Other people might be familiar with this idea of the Kali Yuga coming to an end, metrics for that, right? Ayurvedic wisdom around these sacred times. For me personally, and I'm starting to tease my role in all of this, but for me personally, the language that and the mathematics or science that I follow is this idea of the age of Aquarius. And then secondary to that, I work with the system of human design, the science of differentiation, which talks about 2027 being a big marker and a shift in reality of a 400-year cycle, and probably even a bigger cycle. I've more studied and I'm more familiar with the 400-year cycle that's shifting in 2027, very connected to our sovereignty. And then my language as a practitioner is the age of Aquarius, which I refer to as the age of Aquarius and Leo, because again, we're bridging polarities, and Leo and Aquarius are opposite signs in the zodiac. They're opposite from each other in the wheel of astrology. And the age of Aquarius and Leo technically refers to something called the precession. It's based on the rotation of the Earth's axis and the constellation it's pointing to. And what it refers to is a 26,000-year cycle of this precession, moving through 12 different signs. And around this time, there's different metrics that measure it. We're completing about, I'm rounding up, a 2,200-year cycle, entering into a new sign, the age of Aquarius, but that not just that we're entering into a new sign after 2,200 years, but that we are entering an age or a time on Earth that's been prophesized about in all these different cultures and traditions. And one of those prophecies is the age of Aquarius. There's a famous song, I don't know when it's from, maybe the 70s or 80s, the age of Aquarius. This is the time of the age of Aquarius. And for me, the age of Aquarius in Leo is about sovereignty and power. That's why my business is called The Power Within, because I understood or understand or received wisdom and guidance that the best way to describe this shift in humanity's collective is that we're shifting out of power structures of power over or power under into a system of power with. And the basis for my business is something that came through me that I taught at my very first leadership workshop that integrated spiritual self and spiritual ideas and business self, which is that we're shifting from power over or power under into power with, but we can't have power with until we have power within. So we can't have power with until we have power within. And that means that one of the big, massive callings of our times is to awaken to our personal power. And that's really why I'm here, because I've been on a journey of awakening into my own personal power. And it's completely changed the way I see reality and life on Earth. And it's something I feel very driven and called to share with you all. I'll speak a little bit more into this power dynamic, this power structure or structural shift. When I speak about a shift from power over into power with, I'm speaking about it on a collective level, on a personal level, and very much on an interpersonal level. Sometimes I feel or hear the saying that the revolution is relational. It's about how we relate to each other, which really encapsulates or captures the power over under dynamic. But for me, that's just as much how I relate to my friends and family, to my spouse in marriage. I happen to be married. A journey from power over or under into power with. And I'll definitely be speaking into that in another episode of this podcast. But it's also just as much about corporations, companies, organizations. It's a good segue into my background, but it's about organizational structures. It's about the Pope and the papacy. and organized religion as much as it is about every single company on the S&P 500, every CEO that runs an organization and relates to their management team, and everyone on that management team that relates to subordinates or more junior employees. And even for all the junior employees to really feel the power within and power with. So we're moving into a different era in so many ways. You can see these markers in so many ways, where the age of AI is shifting everything, right? The speed of change and evolution is accelerating technologically and from a human consciousness standpoint. So I'm here in a way to kind of lift the veil. This idea of seeing beyond the veil, seeing behind the scenes. That's in a way what spirituality or spirit is, right? Seeing the unseen, the invisible hand of God, or whatever you'd like to call it, the creator. But I'm here to lift the veil. I'm here to awaken you to your own power. And I'm here also to have fun and be playful about big things, big serious changes, and also expand my own field, my own awareness, my own intelligence with the guests that I'll have on the podcast. So the last subject I want to get into is to explain a little bit of my background, who I am and why I'm here, even speaking to you about all this. So who am I and what am I doing here recording this podcast? I'm a multidimensional being. My name is Maxine Devon. That's my married name for 30 some odd years. And still I sometimes move through the world as Maxine Botasazan. That's my birth name. And how do I even begin to explain myself and my background? As I begin to normalize a different way of experiencing self and seeing the world, I'm gonna tap into that for how I explain myself or introduce myself rather. So astrologically, I'm very fiery. I like to say that I'm a quadruple Leo, but really I'm a Leo sun. I am quadruple Leo, but in terms of the big three, I'm a Leo sun, I'm a Taurus rising, and I'm a Pisces moon. But I am a quadruple Leo, and if you've ever done a reading with me, I offer readings in this special field I'll share more about. You'll know that there are two luminaries, the sun and the moon, the 8 planets, so 10 heavenly bodies that are the core focus of our birth chart. Of those, there are 5 that are personal planets. You can probably guess which they are. They're the closer planets to us. And 4 of my 5 personal planets live in the constellation of Leo. In human design speak, for anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's a sort of philosophy or a system for mapping each person's unique energy. It's based off of astrology, Kabbalah, and the I Ching, and it maps your unique energy system and destiny, gifts, goals, much like astrology. When I do astrology readings, I focus on the same thing, destiny, gifts, all that jazz. And so in human design speak, I'm a manifester. I'm a 6-2 manifester, so the archetypes of the hermit and the role model. Beyond that, in terms of my purpose, I very much feel my purpose and destiny are about bringing the feminine, divine feminine, or feminine archetypal energy back into our daily lives, into our personal lives, into our professional lives, into leadership, into the business world. I have another venture that I'm sure I'll speak more about. It's called the Holding Company, and it's about bringing the feminine back into our companies, our leadership, our businesses, our personal lives. So that's a big part of who I am, embracing the feminine. And I had to go on a whole journey with myself, embracing my feminine after many, many years of living in and succeeding in my masculine or what I would call a more patriarchal world. And that brings me to what many people begin with, which is my academic background and credentials. I did go to a liberal arts school. I went to Barnard College at Columbia University, and then at a pretty young age, I went to Harvard Business School and I got a master's in business administration there. And I did really well. I graduated with honors, and I like to say that I mastered the business world, the old systems, the old worlds that I believe are crumbling in many senses. And I had a very successful career in the business world up until my 30s, even a little into my 30s. I worked in media. I was at NBC Universal. My career kind of skyrocketed. I became a vice president at a very young age, and I work for a chairperson who sat on the executive committee reporting into the CEO. So I work with top leaders in corporate, also in startups and ventures that we invested in. I was always working with very powerful people and leaders. Even after I formally left my identity and role in the business world at NBC Universal, I actually started to advise founders and CEOs of startups and venture-backed companies in Israel and New York, in LA. So I had this career identity in the business world, and then I mentioned over the past 7 years, a little bit more than that now, I went on a spiritual journey. And in that process, I met and discovered my true self, my higher self, my authentic expression behind Maxine and the pedigree or the degrees or the accomplishments. And it was a beautiful journey. Hopefully, I'll get a chance to share more about that. But a big part of it was bringing the feminine back in after that successful career in the old systems, the patriarchy, the old. And it's funny, even when I was in the business world, I was really straddling the old and the new. I was working at a legacy company like NBC to guide them on new strategies and how to compete with new competition and how to innovate and transform. So I was transforming from within that organization. And now I like to say that I help do transformation work at the level of the human self. I still work with power and leadership, very constant themes for me and very prominent in my human design and my makeup. But I do it at the individual level, and I believe it'll have the biggest impact. In Kabbalah, there's this idea that every single person represents a whole world in and of themselves. And I've had to do a lot of unlearning to accept that, even as I launched my own spiritual business, The Power Within, and I had various degrees of success in my first year, and very much like an MBA, I was measuring that and looking at trends and revenue and how my business was doing and the health of my business or the growth or success. And I was guided, and I had to keep coming back to this idea that every single person is a whole world unto themselves. And I would get phenomenal feedback about impact at an individual level with the people in my courses. But as a businesswoman who's used to working with millions of dollars or at a large scale, who was hired to grow and scale, I've had to really unlearn and relearn and return to truth, which is really about the sacredness of each and every person and how we are all leaders. When I built my company and I understood I was here to focus on leadership and teach a new blueprint for leadership, I thought I'd be going back in and working with CEOs. And then over time, I was very clearly shown that leadership is not actually only the highest ranking person at a company. It's every single person walking this earth is a leader. The choices you make, the ability to pause and choose differently or breathe when we're scared and be conscious, consciously choose something is leading. Because really, fundamentally, at a soulful accounting level, I like to talk about vertical accounting with the heavens instead of kind of the accounting we know. It's horizontal money and on the books. In vertical, soulful accounting, our personal choices, our thoughts, our evolution, the growth, the evolution of our individual consciousness, what we embody as we walk on this earth is our contribution to the collective consciousness. It's our contribution to the ever expanding universe, right? we live in a universe that's always expanding, and our ability to fulfill our portion of that, our unique expression to share it with the world and expand and grow and evolve is our contribution. And everything else that we create is like a bonus. And I have a lot of thoughts on that. This is like a whole new curriculum that is being written. But, the other part of my bio is that on my spiritual journey of 7+ years, I did a lot of seeking and a lot of searching and a lot of healing and a lot of growing. And for several years, I was banging my head against the wall because my career as an advisor to founders of startups was dwindling, and I couldn't understand why. And there was one or two really, really rough years where I was really banging my head against the wall, and I really lost a sense of myself and my power in the world as I let that identity crumble and I didn't have something to replace it with. It's a very humbling experience. And in that time, in a moment of awareness or in a moment of receiving, I understood that maybe I was barking up the wrong tree because I would get phone calls or emails, or I would reach out and have conversations about opportunities with companies, and nothing would work out. None of the doors were opening. And I signed up for a course. It's a more cosmic or magical story than this, but I did sign up for a course through Pacifica, their online programming, and I trained in a field called archetypal astrology, which is based on the Jungian world of transpersonal psychology and archetypes. And as one of my professors, who's been a mentor figure for me, said, and I believe he borrowed this from Harry Potter, the wand finds the wizard. And this was my wand. This was one of the big wands I have to play with and work with. And so I forget what got me into this second part of my bio. Oh, I remember now that our impact is through our own embodiment and everything else is a bonus, which is to say that it's been very humbling for the last 2 to 3 years to do private readings for people because I can just see how everyone's constellation is so different. And some people are here to focus on their career and they have real destiny or karma there. When I trained in this field and I went deep into my birth chart and my own expression or understanding of my destiny, I understood that it wasn't in the 10th house of career. Actually, I had no planets in the 10th house of career. And I joked that I had this moment that I was like, why did I dedicate my 20s and all this money and family support and hundreds of thousands of dollars and so much energy, forget the money, the time and the energy to my career, and it was very humbling to see that actually it wasn't ever about that. That was a part of the puzzle. That was a pathway to this deeper expression and pathway and destiny, which is spirituality. And it took time, but it was only when I signed up for that course and I stuck with it as well that I understood the real reason that I'm here, to experience something greater and to really validate my spiritual journey and path. There's so many little nuggets I'd love to share about how I got from here to there and even where I'm at now. But I'm going to leave it at that. A little bit of peppering or coloring in of the diagram of who I am in this moment and what I've come to be on this planet. It's been a very powerful transformational journey. I sometimes say that I've lived many lifetimes in this one lifetime. I've done a ton of integration of my different parts, and that's one of the gifts and the medicine that I offer in my private personal practice. It's something I will be offering in the holding company, and it's something I hope to share with you all, whoever finds their beautiful little ears listening to this. So I'm going to wrap things up for our first episode. Thank you so much for being here. As I produce and record, I'd love to hear where I'm having an impact, and also very much would love to hear what you'd like more of. I'd love for this to be as interactive as possible. And stay tuned, there's a lot more to come.